Welcome to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Podcast. I'm Graham Richmond, and this is your wiretaps for Monday, August 22nd, 2022. I'm joined by Alex Brown from Cornwall, England. Alex, how are things going?
Very good, thank you.
So, you and I, I was out on vacation for a little bit, and so I'm feeling kind of rested and ready for the next chapter here or whatever. And I wanted to thank you for a great reading recommendation that you'd given me, and I managed to get through most of it during vacation. This book called Red Notice by a guy named Bill Browder, who's a Stanford MBA grad and a kind of famous guy in the sort of hedge fund world and investment world for getting into Russia early and then having some trouble with Putin, et cetera. So really interesting book. So thanks, Alex, for that.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it, and it's a fascinating insight into what's currently going on in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really, I'm not an expert on, Russia, or geopolitics, but yeah, I just feel like I've learned a ton in reading this book. And what's cool about it is it's a true story about this guy, but it's written in a way that makes it like, who's the guy that wrote, Liar's Poker and all that stuff. It has that kind of financial thriller
Right.
vibe to it. So it's been a lot of fun to read. In other news, though, I know people are wondering why we're giving them reading recommendations when they need to be writing their essays and getting ready for round one. So what's on the horizon MBA admissions wise?
Yeah, I mean, round one deadlines are just around the corner for the early schools. So I think we're kicking off with Oxford in August 31st, but most notably Harvard and Wharton September 7th, and Duke and actually LBS is September 9th. So yeah, I mean, we're only a couple of weeks away from really hitting the ground running at this point with round one. I did sort of take a deeper dive into looking at all the round one deadlines, and I like to see it like season on season. Sloan coming in at the back end as usual, very good.
Yeah.
So they might get a few extra apps for that. But yeah, no, round one's coming up.
Yeah, definitely. And I know, we've been saying this for weeks, but I think this current season, the season where candidates applied this past year and are starting school now, has really come to an end. And reason I mention that is because I noticed that Stanford kind of closed out their wait list, it seems, last week. So that's sounds like a done deal. Candidates are showing up on campus and getting started. So we're definitely full on.
I mean, that's the key. Once preterm starts, schools then absolutely know where they're at and make slight adjustments off the wait list and then cut the remainder of what we call at Wharton their summer wait list.
Yeah, exactly. One other thing, I know we've, over the past month or so, been very excited about the launch of Clear Admit Plus, and people know all about that and how to sign up, et cetera. I did want to mention that as part of Clear Admit Plus, we do a monthly private webinar where you and I hang out with Clear Admit Plus members, answer their questions. The next one of those is coming up on August 29th, a Monday at noon Eastern. So if you're on the fence about joining Clear Admit Plus, get on board before our next private webinar, because we have a lot of fun in those webinars, get a chance to kind of answer people's questions. And, they're not recorded or anything. It's kind of a nice off-the-record conversation. So yeah, so sign up if you wish. You can go to bit.ly/Clear Admit Plus. Over on the website, Alex, we've been running a lot of content. The first thing we did is we ran a lot of admissions director Q&As. Lauren on our team has been diligently gathering those together and publishing them. So she's done interviews with admissions directors at Washington Foster, U Maryland Smith, OSU Fisher, Boston College, SMU Cox, and then a couple of schools in Europe, which include Manchester and IMD and Lausanne. So there's a lot of good reading on the site. And I find what's interesting about reading those is even if you're not applying to some of these schools, you often get a lot of really great nuggets in terms of admissions advice, because we ask admissions directors for tips and strategies, and oftentimes the tips that they give are very universal and would work if you're applying to, INSEAD, Harvard, IMD, and any of these schools. Doesn't really matter. So give those a read if you're interested. The other thing I wanted to get your take on, Alex, is we've been running these class profiles. The schools have started to publish the statistics on the incoming class. And so we ran Wharton before I went on vacation. And then since then, UCLA and Cornell have published their class profiles. And I'm seeing, down kind of admissions volume down. And that's one of the things I wanted to mention, because I know when you and I talked about the Wharton class profile a couple episodes ago, we didn't mention that. And that's because we were kind of, I think, dazzled by the numbers and the general shape of the class. And we missed the sort of headline news of Wharton being down 14%, right?
Yeah. No, I mean it's super interesting. I think for sure this last season app volume is down across the board at many of the top schools, and for this week the class profiles of Anderson reflect that. You said 360. Well, they reduced their incoming class size as a somewhat potentially as a result of their application volume being down. And well, we don't know that they are related, but one might make that leap of faith. But yeah, it looks like class size, application volumes are down, and that's impacting potentially the class profiles at some of these schools.
Yeah, so yeah, just to put a fine point on that. So UCLA's application volume was down 20%. They do have a smaller class size, as you point out. They used to have a class size of 360, now it's 330. And as a result of that, they kind of have held the line on, some of the counting stats, although they are down a little bit, 7% in terms of women, and they're up with international students by 11%.
So I'll hold you on that statistic, those two statistics right there. Certainly when I worked at the Wharton School, the the gender split, international students versus domestic students, was always smaller with the international students, right? So,
yeah.
For example, maybe it was 35-40% female with the domestic students, and maybe it was 20-25% for the international students. So if you're admitting more international students, or you have more international students coming to your program, that's going to put a little bit of pressure on that gender number.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, they kind of work counter. And so
Yeah.
it's interesting. Cornell did not. So you mentioned Cornell also released a class profile. They did not share application volume. I assume that it was also down a bit, but they did maintain their class size, and they managed to maintain the percentage of women at 39%. Now, interestingly, though, they also had more internationals, so 8% up internationals. But so somehow they did manage to dance do the dance and maintain that balance. But I agree with you wholeheartedly that we see over and over again the international pool to U.S. programs is much more male than female, or at least more so than the domestic market. So, yeah, interesting. We'll have to keep an eye on all this, because we have many class profiles to still be released, and these are just the first few. So I'll be really curious to see, and also just to understand, what does this mean for application volume this season? Does it flatten out? Does it continue to go down? I don't think it's going to go up, so I think that's good news for those of you tuning in who are applying this season, but we'll see how it all unfolds.
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting when we get the class profiles from Harvard and Stanford, because, at the very top of the food chain, what were their active volumes like? And if they were similarly off, then yeah, that's a pretty big sort of issue for this last season, as it then, we'll see then what happens in round one for this season. But I agree with you, Graham. There's nothing that makes me think that those apps are going to spike up quickly in round one. So it might, again, this season might be a very good opportunity to apply.
Yeah, agreed. A couple more things before we dive into the candidates for this week, which I'm actually really excited to talk about, because we have a few interesting, kind of admission strategy pieces there. But before we get into that, we had our first ever Real Humans alumni online event. So as many people know, we feature candidates on our site who are in the Real Humans Alumni Series, who are graduates of top MBA programs working at top firms. And we ask them all about how they got their jobs and how the MBA has proved useful in their career, et cetera. And so we decided to do an online event. This was Mike on our team who took the initiative there. And we had, it was a real cast. I mean, gosh, we had somebody from Deloitte, Disney, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, and the Boston Consulting Group. And in terms of the schools they'd attended, these are graduates of like Kellogg, Columbia, INSEAD, USC, Marshall, Emory. So a handful of top schools, top, individuals who are usually a couple of years into their career at this point. And there's going to be a recording. There was a recording made, so we're going to make that available on our website for people to watch. But it should be really interesting. The conversation I heard from Mike was a lot of fun and really insightful. So check that out when we publish it on the site in case you missed the actual event. Speaking of events, on September 14th, 21st, and 28th, that's 3 consecutive Wednesdays in the month of September, we're doing admissions kind of essay events again, and we've got an amazing set of schools. We've got Berkeley, Yale, Chicago, Wharton, Cornell, Columbia, Carnegie Mellon, Duke, Texas, UNC, Dartmouth, INSEAD, LBS, and Georgetown, all joining us over the course of those 3 events. So you can, head over to our website and sign up for those. I don't have a short link for you today. We'll get that ready for the next episode of the podcast, but you can sign up and join us for those events. As always, you can also email us at info@clearedmit.com. But Alex, I know you spent some time going through all the recent ApplyWire entries to come up with some candidates for us to profile this week. So shall we get into it?
Let's kick on.
All right. So this is Wiretaps candidate number 1. So this first entry is an ApplyWire entry that we received, and the candidate has just 3 schools on the target list at the moment. They are Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. They want to start business school in the fall of 23. And they are currently in a role as a co-founder of an EdTech company, which they've been doing for, I guess, about 7 years now. Prior to that, they worked in investment banking as an analyst at JP Morgan. This candidate is based in India. They have a 3.23 undergraduate GPA, and if you're curious about the total length of work experience, it's actually 10 years. They would love to get into consulting or maybe eventually venture capital after their MBA. And basically, it's an interesting quandary in that they don't yet have a test score. The reason for that is that they're about to sit the CFA Level 3 exam, and so they claim they're going to wait to get that done this month and then proceed with GMAT preparation and apply to these schools in round 2. So, Alex, I just wanted to share a couple of details. This startup that the person is the co-founder of has generated $1 million in lifetime revenue thus far. And they seeded it with only $500. They have educated 200,000 low-income students and seen more than 50% of their students jump in their grades. They've got this person's hired, managed, and led teams of 50 plus employees in the current role. So it's a EdTech startup, I believe, that works with corporations to help provide education to underprivileged individuals. So interesting work experience, entrepreneurial endeavor, and so on. But what do you make of this candidate's odds? I mean, 10 years of experience, we don't have a GMAT, and they're looking at Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton.
Yeah, I mean, it's an application that has some really super strong elements, but there are obviously some areas of potential issue also. So let's start off with the really good news. I mean, you've got to love the professional experience. Starting off in investment banking for 3 years. I mean, probably a bit of a high flyer. Over in India, but nevertheless presumably that they were doing well at that. But then they made this really interesting move. They obviously identified an opportunity and then went after it with this EdTech startup. And it appears that this EdTech startup, has really significant impact, probably a very interesting story. And, they're now managing a significant number of folks and so on and so forth. So lots of growth and impact, which is what we obviously like to see. So all that stuff would sort of really point towards, this is a really high profile candidate. So where are the weaker sides? I mean, on in terms of their sort of demographics, in terms of their profile, they're going to be potentially overrepresented coming from India, assuming male. I don't know that we know that, but I'm making that assumption, and so forth. So that makes you think that they certainly would have a better chance if they applied in round 1 versus round 2. Mm-hmm. That's just sort of default. If you are overrepresented, you need to be targeting round 1 to maximize your chances. Therein lies a bit of an issue because they haven't yet taken the GMAT. they're sort of targeting October, which would push them into round 2. So that's going to be a little bit of a problem, I think, especially as they're only targeting Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. Let's assume that they come back with a 740 on the GMAT. I mean, that, might be very hopeful. I don't know, but they're going to have to be targeting that kind of number. I still think it'll be a reach, Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton in round 2, coming from this potentially overrepresented demographic. So the question is, can they get that GMAT under the wire sooner? Is it worth delaying the CFA exam to focus on the GMAT? Probably, if that's doable. And then also expanding that target school list beyond Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. I mean, I mentioned a little bit earlier, Sloan's round 1 deadline is September 29, so they could actually get into Sloan's round 1 a little bit easier than they would be able to Harvard, which is September the 7th, for example. So they've got to think about all that. And then finally, they've got 10 years of experience. So they're going to be on the longer end with that. So they're really going to have to show fit how they're going to fully engage and make the most of this sort of 2-year experience. So lots of things to juggle here, Graham. Really love the entrepreneurial experience. Just a little bit concerned about some of these other aspects.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I did want to mention that they wrote a note in which they said to you, they said, "Hi, Alex, love the podcast. Never thought I'd binge listen a podcast." So they've clearly been tuning in and hopefully picking up a lot of tips that will help them along the way. But I think one of the drums that we always beat is this round 1, if you're overrepresented. And I fear that they are kind of overrepresented, even though the entrepreneurial experience is unique. I just really have some concerns about, I mean, when I think about how many candidates in the MBA program at Stanford or Harvard are over the age of 32 or 33, which is where this person likely will sit when they get there, it's a small number. It's a really small number. And I wonder, I feel like they need to cast a wider net. I'm not saying they shouldn't apply to those programs, and obviously we need a GMAT score to really know, how competitive this candidate's going to be, and we don't have a lot of information on their undergraduate experience, and so I just can't. And the other thing that was just in the back of my mind as you were talking was, if this person's running a company right now, why wouldn't they consider doing a part-time executive MBA from, a leading program, maybe even a little closer to home? There's INSEAD and LBS offer stuff in the Middle East and obviously in their home markets too. So I don't know. I'm just trying to think about what are the possibilities. And I know this candidate mentioned in the comments that they're thinking of exiting. And so obviously if they exit and can get out, then they want to do a full-time program. I get that. But I just want to make sure that they're really considering the full slate of offerings that are out there because of their age and where they are in their career. Because they might actually find that they might have a better experience in a program like the Sloan Masters program that's offered out of LBS. That's a sort of a different, it's like a Sloan Fellows program, I think it's called, and it's a 1-year kind of management degree. In any event, just things for them to consider. I would want to know more though, like about outside activities and also have that test score handy. That would be useful. So in any event, clearly impressive entrepreneurial experience, but I think it's still an uphill battle in round 2 at these very top schools.
Yeah. No, completely agree. And you make a great point about those Sloan programs out of LBS and so on and so forth. So lots to consider, lots to like, but, question marks for sure.
Agreed. All right, I want to wish them the best of luck, and hopefully they enjoy hearing their profile, dissected and analyzed here. So thanks for submitting that, and let's move on though and talk about Wiretap's candidate number 2. So this is another ApplyWire entry from a candidate who wants to start school in the fall of 23. They've been working in engineering in the A&D industry. Shamedly, I had to Google this. That's the Aerospace and Defense industry. I don't ever remember these acronyms. The schools that they're targeting are Berkeley, Michigan, Kellogg, Chicago, Wharton, and Yale. They, as I said, have been working in engineering, initially in a very technical role, but now in more of a business role. And they want to do some consulting after business school. They're targeting Bain, BCG, Deloitte, McKinsey, and PwC. They have a whopping 770 on the GMAT and a 3.52 GPA. They've had 5 years of work experience, located in Los Angeles, and hope to kind of come back there, but are actually targeting schools, all around the U.S. And they mentioned that part of that's because they want to maybe live somewhere else for a bit before returning. The other thing I wanted to mention is that they talk about how they don't have a ton of outside activities. I did want to clarify, though, that they did do, I guess they did a master's degree in engineering, right? So, and they completed that, I guess, in the early phases of their career, so it must have been part-time. And so that's part of the reason why there might be some limited outside activities. But I'll let you had some back and forth with them, so I'll let you weigh in and tell me what you think of this candidacy.
Yeah, I mean, this candidate is, engineer, looks like they've done well at work in terms of switching from a highly technical role into sort of, more of a sort of a business function role, or at least, and that's where they're wanting to move forward. I love their term. They're want to look at stuff more from a human-centered perspective.
Yeah, I saw that.
Well, that's marketing, right?
Yeah.
So they want to become a marketer. I love that. As a seasoned marketer without any technical skills like me. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. They're obviously super smart. I mean, you don't get a 770 on the GMAT if you're not super smart. They've done a master's degree in engineering, so they might be even a bit of a nerd, as it were. But lots, I think, a lot to like here, and a lot of sort of, obviously from the academics, it's going to be super strong. The numbers very, very, very strong. Their evolution at work looks really, really strong. They might maybe sort of fine tune a little bit their goals. Maybe there's an industry focus. Well, they want to go back ultimately into the aerospace and defense industry, which is very, very good. So frankly, Graham, I think this person is a super strong candidate. I'm going to throw a question back to you, however. We don't know the gender of this candidate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if this is a female candidate, does that make them a stronger candidate than if they were a male candidate?
For me, it does, just because there are fewer engineering masters, technical candidates in the female applicant pool than there are in the male pool. So,
I mean, that's my point. I do think this does make a difference, because if you're a female engineer and obviously done very well, you're kind of swimming upstream a little bit in your work environment, potentially. It's going to be a little bit more male dominated in that engineering function, potentially. So there are going to be potentially more challenges to your work situation and so on and so forth. So I guess my point being, if that is the case, and I've got a sneaking suspicion that is the case, that potentially elevates the profile a little bit. It makes me think, well, Stanford or a program like that should be on their radar. Obviously, then it's a real question as how they tackle that fantastic Stanford first essay. What means most to you and why? But I do think it's important factor to consider it. What I'm not saying is it's easier to get an MBA if you're female. What I am saying is, because this candidate, well, if this candidate is female, they may have faced more challenges in their environments, and therefore have to striven more to overcome and do some, do more stuff basically to prove who they are. So, interesting. Yeah, I think they might be female, and therefore they should target Stanford. How about that?
I had not thought about the gender of this candidate. I wasn't sure, and so but you're right. If it's female candidate, engineering masters, etc., swimming upstream, all will work in their favor. One of the things I liked about this candidate, and I know there might be some issues with the extracurriculars because they were pursuing a master's for the first 3 years of their career. That's but
even that, Graham, and I do believe this. If they were super active in their undergraduate, they've shown a behavior for
Right.
participation and for getting involved and for doing
Yeah.
things. They have a couple of, I'm not calling them excuses, but reasons for not being currently super active. One is they did the masters. And then secondly, coming out of the masters part-time, presumably we're in the midst of COVID.
That's correct. And they have been doing some volunteer work at a food bank. They're not,
Yeah.
I would encourage them to think about whether there are other things they do, like maybe they're a runner or they regularly exercise, or, it's not, the main thing is just to show that you're well-rounded. And yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you. If they have a nice track record from undergrad, plus the first 3 years of this 5-year career, they were pursuing a part-time degree while working full-time, that certainly rounds things out. So the only thing I was going to say, and this really struck me, I'm going to just read a quote that this candidate shared in their post. They said, "I started my career in an extremely technical role, but have been in an integration role for the last 1.5 years where I manage, schedule, budgets, and delegate tasks. Through my move from a technical role to an integration role, I've learned that I'm energized by getting to solve business problems and figuring out ways to best support those around me." Now, the reason I'm reading that is because that is like textbook, that's like almost like a textbook perfect response for an engineer who wants to go to business school. Like, I love hearing an engineer say something like that. It's like, I was doing technical stuff, but then I got pulled into this more business related, role. And that's gotten me really fired up. And that's what I like to do. And it's a perfect sort of pitch for going back and getting a degree in business. And so the reason I called it out is not only is it really well written, but it just suggests to me that this person's going to be really great at expressing his or her kind of need for the MBA and just sort of saying all the right things in the process. Because I really, no edits I would have to that kind of statement right there. Like, they really, summed it up very succinctly. Packed a lot of information into those couple of sentences, and I just thought it was really worth kind of calling out, in my view.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So, what do you think about the school selection? They talk about how they want to go back to LA, but then they have a lot of, schools on the list that are, they got Michigan, they've got Chicago, Wharton, Yale. None of those schools are near LA. Obviously, Michigan has a presence in LA, and we know that Kellogg sends a fair number of people, and Wharton does as well, to California. But I guess, the question is I know you had said to them, hey, what about Stanford? What about Anderson? Yeah. What do you think of this strategy of, well, I know I'm coming back to LA, but I want to go live somewhere else for a while to do the MBA?
Certainly they need to apply to Stanford.
Yeah.
The reason for not applying for Stanford was the admit rate for Stanford is so onerous. But at the end of the day, if you don't apply, then you're not getting admitted. Right. So you're completely disqualifying yourself. So I think they really need to look at that first essay and really need to sort of do that level of introspection to see if Stanford could potentially be an option for them. But yeah, no, it's interesting because if you know you want to be in LA, sort of short and long term, then that's where your networks need to be. And that presents a really strong argument for a local top business school where the majority of their alumni are in that region. So that points to Anderson, for example. But they, their sort of refrain from that is, well, they like Anderson, they visited and so on and so forth. They want to take a spell away from LA to then return to LA. And I think that's interesting. It's a little bit of a luxury type sort of decision because you are potentially compromising the longer term because your networks are going to be a little bit more diluted in that regard. But, at the end of the day, how valuable, how important is that network, I guess, is the answer to the question.
And I would actually argue that if someone were to say to me, okay, this person wants to be in LA after business school and they've gotten into Anderson and, Wharton, I still think you would argue that you go to the best school that you can get into and that Wharton, or Harvard or Stanford are in a sort of a tier above in a way that they have these networks and that you're going to be better served even despite the non-local nature of those programs. So,
no, I completely agree with that. Where the argument starts to fall down is when you compare Anderson to, let's say, Yale or Ross or whatever. So
I agree.
At schools within their same tier.
Right.
should Anderson be more appealing?
Right. Yeah, that's the rub. And so I think, obviously this candidate has a 770 on the GMAT, really interesting work experience in terms of this pivot from technical into more managerial. They've got a master's degree. I think they have all the components, as I said, the good head on their shoulders in terms of explaining this need for the MBA. So I think they need to go to a M7 type school. And I would argue that any of the M7s will probably, serve them well in terms of if they, they'll probably be able to pick their, go back to LA if that's what they really want to do. So I think you're right. They might have that luxury.
And Palo Alto will be a bit closer than Pennsylvania.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So in any event, I did want to thank that poster for putting up their profile on the site. Hopefully they're tuning in to hear this advice and can leave us some additional comments if they have questions. But yeah, I want to wish them luck as they travel through the admissions journey. Alex, let's move on though and talk about Wiretap's candidate number 3. So this third candidate is another 2023 start date for their MBA. They've got 5 schools on the target list, and those schools are Dartmouth, Harvard, Kellogg, Chicago, and Wharton. This is a military candidate who is enlisted and is is in the Army as a Chinese linguist. They want to get into consulting after the military and after business school. So they've got Bain, BCG, Ernst & Young, McKinsey, and PwC on their list. They have a GMAT score, another amazing score for this week here, 760. They've got a GPA of 3.38. They've been working for 7 years, or serving, I guess, although I think they also had some work before they enlisted in the military. They're located in Hawaii right now, and they would love to land either in the Midwest or the East Coast, which is why their schools are all either in the Midwest or on the East Coast in terms of those target schools. And they mention in the notes, they say, I'm an enlisted Army Chinese linguist working in the intelligence field. They graduated from a top 50 school majoring in economics. They have some light extracurriculars, some tutoring, and they do some work at an animal shelter. It's a white male, 29 years old, and they also mentioned that they love the podcast, which I now see that, Alex. That must be why you picked them for the show, though there may be other reasons too. But what do you make of this candidacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think this candidate has a little bit of an unorthodox pathway to the military, or so it seems to me. And quote, I'm enlisted Army Chinese linguist, working intelligence field, and they worked a few years in very insignificant jobs first and then enlisted. So
that was their words, insignificant, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Those are all their words. So maybe out of the 7 years of work experience, there's 1 or 2 years where they sort of wandered around a little bit, then they enlisted, and that sort of allowed them to find their focus, their maturity, and their contribution, their growth, their impact, and so on and so forth, which I think is perfectly fine. I think AdCom will appreciate that sort of self-awareness and honesty, and as much as anything else in terms of how they articulate that. Obviously, having a 760 GMAT is going to be super helpful. That their GPA 338 is going to be a little bit lower than average, but having a 760 GMAT is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it should help.
So I think that's all quite good. So they're enlisted. They're in Chinese. They're working as a linguist in the intelligence field. So presumably they're probably doing some quite interesting work and so forth. And we know geopolitically the importance of having. Of understanding China. China is going to be the largest economy in the world in the not too distant future, I presume. I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but that just seems to be what's going to be the case. So potentially this candidate with a good, a strong top MBA has a lot of opportunity going forward. If they're steered back into that sort of focus on Asia and so forth. So I think, frankly, there's potentially lots like. I was a bit surprised that Ross isn't on their target list of programs. I could see sort of Kellogg, Ross being the sort of sweet spot in terms of where they should be targeting. In terms of a couple of top schools in slightly different tiers. But yeah, I think there's a lot to like here, Graham.
Yeah, it's funny, we talk about their goals. They talk about wanting to get into consulting, and then they say, maybe working, I think their exact words were working towards an exec position in a company in the defense realm. And so the thing that jumped out at me, and you were, I think, alluding to this, is that I don't hear anything about China or Chinese or using, some of the skills and maybe cultural awareness that they have now in that future role. Now, maybe they would, I don't know. But I think if I were this candidate, I would underline that bit because I think it's interesting. It'll help them to stand out. As you say, any admissions reader knows that China is an important country, a growing country in terms of its, the size of its economy and yeah, just geopolitically. So I just feel like they're missing an opportunity if they say, yeah, I want to do consulting and then go work in defense, and they're not going to, play up that sort of China angle.
Right.
So I would encourage them to think about that. As far as the school selection, 760, 3.38, they've got the numbers to get into any of these kind of top schools. I like that they're kind of maybe a bit of a bootstrapper, had to find their way, enlist, and then work their way up in the military. So there's a lot to like. Michigan was an interesting omission given that they have this Midwest interest. I would throw that into the mix. What do you think about their chances that, the kind of Harvard and Whartons of the world that are on their list? Like, do you think that they have a chance? Is it, the numbers seem to line up. They're a little bit older, I guess, than the average candidate, but that's common for military, right? So do you think that is there enough here to make this person like a Harvard candidate? Or are you thinking, oh no, they're going to end up more in kind of another M7 or that next group of top schools?
Well, it could be that they end up at another M7, but if they don't apply to Harvard, then they'd always wonder if they should have applied to Harvard.
Right,
So
right.
I think from an application strategy standpoint, they need to apply to Harvard. Certainly, you're coming in as an enlisted candidate. The default might be that you're not in the same bracket as other military candidates coming in. But it's about what you've done, what you've learned, how you've grown, and your impact, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And I know enlisted candidates that have been successful in gaining admissions to top, M7 programs. I'm still friends with one that was at Wharton at the time I was there.
Yeah.
So it's all doable. It does depend on their specific experience. And I agree with you also. Their goal focus could be strengthened a little bit to help bolster their overall candidacy in that regard.
Yeah, totally. And I also wonder, they're in Hawaii now, but I wonder if over the course of the several years they've likely been in the military, if they've been posted to other places and had, other kind of international experiences too. So there's potentially a lot to like. We don't have all the details here. And some of them they probably couldn't even share with us, but I want to thank them for their service, but also for posting to the site and sharing this profile because it is a little bit unorthodox, and I think you're right, they're barking up the right tree. They've got a good mix of schools and should give it a go, and I feel like they're going to land at one of these programs on their list. Good insights though from you to maybe consider Ross as well. Anything else on this one, Alex?
No, I wish them the best of luck, as with all three candidates, obviously, today.
Yeah, so I want to thank you for picking these out week in and week out. So appreciate that, and we'll come back in 1 week's time and do it all again.
Very good. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.